Hi, my name is K.Thomas, W1DED. It's Tuesday night. I'm back with the contest crew. I have Randy, K5ZD, and a couple guests tonight, Bill Faring, W9KKN, and Ed Munns, W0YK. We've invited the two gentlemen to the show to talk about RTTY contesting tonight. Before we get started, I just want to give you a little bit of a background. Bill, W9KKN, has been on the show a couple times. The first time he joined me from Grand Cayman as part of the ZF1A team after the CQ Worldwide Single Sideband contest. Bill is pretty well known as a mastermind behind some of the cutting-edge improvements at some of the best contest stations in North America. Ed Munns is joining us from California, his vineyard. He is a lot of things, but RTTY contesting is one of his favorite modes. If you look at his QRZ page, he is the director of both the CQ RTTY contests, the contest manager for the NCJ RTTY Sprint, and co-sponsor of the 10-meter RTTY contest. And clearly he's a competitor in all those events. And Randy, of course, is also a RTTY contester. Thanks for joining me, guys.
Yep.
Thanks. Thanks for having us again.
So, Bill, I want to start with you and just get a little bit more background. Obviously, you've been on the show before, so we know a lot about your grandfather and ZF1A. But why don't you tell us a little bit about your RTTY background, how you got involved with RTTY to begin with? I know you had a pretty serious effort a couple years ago from ZF1A. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I sort of viewed RTTY as, I guess, almost unexplored territory. But as far as I'm concerned with contesting, before I picked up CW, it was another mode other than sideband. Which was was most of the appeal, right? And what was interesting about it is it was entirely the computer that would be doing the decoding, and is all you had to do to participate is configure the software and the hardware correctly, and then you could be playing in a RTTY contest. And what's also sort of neat about it is that like many other digital modes, not quite as much as FT8. But RTTY is a full duty cycle mode. So as far as, I guess the energy that you're putting into the antenna, similar to even say CW, you're going to be able to, go a lot further and, work even, longer distance DX with it. And, particularly at the time when I was first getting, involved in contesting and just, kind of messing around with a dipole in the attic, that was super appealing because I could actually work JAs from here in the West Coast on my little attic dipole, and whole lot of fun there. But more recently as I've gotten involved in ZF and other places, the RTTY contests were not as sought after at some of these multi-op stations. So when you're involved with multiple people at a multi-op station, sometimes it's or just a station that's shared among more than one person. One of the tricks is that you're either going to do all multi-ops, or you're going to have to sort of divide out the single op efforts amongst the major contests. And it turned out that in ZF1A specifically, a lot of RTTY contests weren't really being claimed by anybody else, which meant that I could go in there and try my best at a single op effort.
And Ed, what about yourself? I'd like you to go a little bit deeper since you haven't been on the show before. Tell us a little bit about how you got into ham radio in the first place, but then obviously give us specifics about your RTTY background.
Yeah, well, so I think my background is similar to people sort of in my age group. I was in Boy Scouts. My Scoutmaster happened to be a ham. So I got the radio merit badge, and actually I got almost all the merit badges, but I got interested in radio there. So in junior high, I got my ham license and talked my dad into getting his so that he'd help me put up antennas. And, we put up a 40-foot push-up mast and a inverted V on 40 meters. And I worked JAs on 40-meter CW every morning before school. Through junior high and high school, because here in California, that was a lot easier than trying to work Europe. So that was kind of how I got started in radio. And then in 2003, I think it was the November meeting of our local ham club, the Northern California Contest Club, there were 4 RTTY enthusiasts who were trying to shame the rest of the club, who were mostly CW operators, into joining them and trying to win the club competition for the RTTY Roundup the 2 months later in January of 2004. And I had never done any RTTY. I think I maybe had an old PK232, if that's the right number, old modem from years ago that I tried to play with. But anyway, I hadn't done much RTTY. But I listened to this presentation and understood that the computer was doing the decoding and the encoding, and all, the operator just sat there and looked at a screen. So I kind of sarcastically raised my hand and said, I don't see what this is all about. You just set this up and, computers can work computers, and the operator can go in the other room and have a beer. And that set everybody off. And so they ganged up on me. And then when I left the meeting, I really felt like I had to now kind of up my game and, figure out how to get on RTTY for this darn contest. So I went back and soldered up an interface cable for a TS950 and got on RTTY and wound up getting a plaque for the Pacific Division in RTTY Roundup. And I actually enjoyed the weekend, except for 48 hours after the contest, my ears were ringing diddles. And that's when I learned that you don't run the volume like you do on CW and sideband. So anyway, that was where I got started. And I turned my cynicism into a real gain, I think, because I realized that all that extra time where the computer's doing the encoding and decoding, I could learn to up my game on other parts of operating. So that's when I really learned to delve into SO2R, and since then SO3R and so forth, because in RTTY it's much more doable than on sideband or CW. So my real attraction to RTTY has been the learning experience of increasing my operating skill across all modes, really, but particularly with SO2R.
So Ed, as a contest director and manager of several RTTY contests, you're in somewhat of a unique position to tell us about how many people are doing RTTY now and whether that's increasing or decreasing. What are you seeing? Are you seeing more adoption, or is FT8 pulling people away?
I would say that RTTY is basically kind of hasn't been affected by FT8. I thought it would have a huge effect, but it actually hasn't. But going back before FT8, when I started getting involved with contest management, which, by the way, was kind of a second big thing for me, because getting involved in that, you get to see, kind of the whole picture of what the contest looks like, and it helps my own perspective and my own operating to be able to, have that insight. But in the beginning, people were saying, "Oh, RTTY is it's exceeding CW in popularity," and I kept hearing all this. And so I went back and, started comparing stats, and that absolutely was not the case. RTTY was increasing, through those years, but so was CW and sideband. So I make it a point in my presentations now to show a graph that shows the history of CW and RTTY, say like in the worldwide, in similar contests, to show people that, yeah, RTTY is increasing, but it's not as big as CW and the others. The other graph I show is then when FT8 came in July of 17, and we started contesting, everyone thought that that was going to drive RTTY away, and it didn't. Where it did drive it away is in DXpeditions, but in contesting, we haven't seen it really affect that. The RTTY Roundup had their all-time highest RTTY participation during the years when you could also operate FT8s in the same contest. So we just really haven't seen an impact yet of FT8. We also haven't figured out really how to contest, I think, as effectively as we could in FT8, but that's another discussion I think we can have.
That's another show for sure. And Randy, this is episode 14 of the Contest Crew, and I don't think we've talked about RTTY that much, and I don't really know exactly what your RTTY background is, so tell me.
Well, I first got introduced to RTTY by WB5NXH, Ron, when I was at the University of Texas. This was a long time ago when they were still using mechanical teleprinters. And some years later, software called WriteLog came along. It had some RTTY capability. It was really good. It was one of the softwares that was really good at doing RTTY. And so I started playing around with it in the late 90s. And in the end, if you make rules and the rules involve working people on all the bands, I don't care what mode it is. If you have scores and you stack rank them, I'm going to do it. So I got into RTTY as just another mode. And what's been fascinating to me is it's a whole different group of people. So it's you see there's crossover. You see some of the same calls that you work on CW and phone, but there's a whole group of guys that just do RTTY. They're active in all the RTTY contests, and a whole different subculture, a whole different group of people that you might see at Dayton and hang out with and talk to. So it's just another part of our hobby. And it's interesting to me. Yes, the computer's doing the work, but you still get to use all the skills that you have about propagation, station building. There's still an art to moving people through the QSOs as fast as you can. So there's more skills to learn and practice, and it's a great mode for. I always tell people, if you want to learn how to do 2 radios, RTTY is the way to go, because it kind of relieves you from having to do all the copying, but it's very good at forcing you to get with the rhythm and get used to kind of what you have to do and all the keyboard work that needs to be done to go from one radio to the other.
So I've asked Randy to take the lead in this conversation because he knows a lot more about RTTY than I do. But before I pass this to him, just a couple foundational questions that any one of you can answer. I'm curious what it takes for somebody like me who's new back into ham radio to set up RTTY, number one. And then number two, what are those specific skills that I would need to work on, Randy, to be somewhat proficient?
All right, well, let's start with the what do you need to get started?
I've been giving presentations for over a decade now on just that topic, and I'll be doing that Thursday, I guess, once again. One of probably the most frustrating thing about RTTY is that there's some hardware, in particular software configuration or settings that you have to do between the sound capability in your operating system, for example, Windows, and your software and so forth. And still to this day, even though I have set up RTTY thousands of times, I'll go to a new location, or I travel down to Aruba, where I operate a lot, and set up, and invariably 2 or 3 things won't work. And most of them I've been through so many times I actually remember how to fix them. But there'll always be one that has happened to me before, but I kind of forget. And so if you don't have as many hours as I do, and you still run into those problems anyway, it can be kind of frustrating. So that's I think the hardest thing about RTTY. But when it comes down to it, it's actually pretty simple. There's audio out and audio in with the radio, and you interface that with the RTTY software, and it's just a matter of getting all the settings right to have that work. And there's lots of tools available. They're my presentations, and then there's a really good website, RTTYcontesting.com, that has tutorials on it with lots of good pictures. And so that's where I send everybody, and that usually gets them most of the way through it. Maybe they have one last thing they get stuck on with their particular radio, and maybe they're interfacing with software that hasn't been done by a lot of people, and they have a particular question, and so people jump in, usually from the reflectors, and help. And that's kind of how we get people bootstrapped up.
So I have a couple of questions that will go in order. So we'll do the simple one first. What is RTTY? 2
carriers, one of which is on at any time, and that's why I think somebody said that it's like key down, because there are 2 carriers, but when one's on, the other one's off, and vice versa. So physically, that's what's going on with your radio. And the on-off nature of those signals is that's the encoding, and your software needs to decode it. And so if you get on the air, you just see these 2 carriers going on and off on a spectrum scope, and they're called tones because in your radio you hear them as audio tones, just like you hear CW as an audio tone, but out in the spectrum, of course, it's RF, and that's all RTTY is, 2 RF signals.
So the reason I start with that question, because it's the setup for the next one, which is you hear about FSK and AFSK like they're different. Are they?
If I'm at a radio, and if each of them is set up properly, I can't tell the difference. I can't tell the difference if I'm in the RF spectrum. So the only difference is locally, and the only difference is in the transmit side. It has nothing to do with receive. It's how you, FSK and AFSK are two methods for how you transmit RTTY. FSK is like CW. It's just on-off keying. You have a plug on your radio, and you key it just like you would with a paddle or with a keyer, but of course with the Baudot code with the RTTY encoding. AFSK is where you use audio tones, two audio tones, to represent those two RF tones, and you feed that into the microphone input or the audio input of the transmitter. So when people say, talk about receiving FSK and AFSK, that's really kind of a mishmash of words because it only applies to how the method that you're using to do the transmit.
Right. So the really great thing here is that to somebody who's tuning through or listening, they both sound the same. FSK sometimes is a little cleaner because it's being generated by the radio, where AFSK often people have to get their sound card settings right to get the levels right and so on.
I mean, either could be true, Randy. There are some situations where somebody might have a very clean AFSK signal. There are certain different modes of, say, the two-tone modulator Windows software, where if you actually measured on a scope, the differential on-off keying might be substantially cleaner. If you look at some of Ed's presentations, he's actually looked on a flex radio and done the measurements, right? So it's really just how well tuned the setup is. And I mean, you're absolutely right. Somebody could completely overdrive really any type of signal that they put into the audio domain of a radio, and it's a lot harder to overdrive just high and low on a serial port pin. So that's why a lot of them end up being cleaner. But if you set it up right, there shouldn't really be any difference on the other side.
Well, actually, if you get down to the nitty gritty, most of the FSK signals on the band today are too wide, because with FSK you're keying the transmitter, so that means that the circuitry inside the transmitter has to have appropriate wave shaping, just like we do to eliminate key clicks in CW, for those that are familiar with that story from decades ago. It's the same thing in RTTY, and most radios, especially the legacy radios, do not have that filtering, and so the FSK signals can be very wide. So the Elecraft radios are one example that they've gone into the DSP software and really wave shaped the RTTY, the FSK signals, so they're pretty clean. But having said that, if you tune up and, as Bill said, configure AFSK properly, it's possible to get actually even slightly narrower signals on AFSK. So the religious argument goes on and on about those two ways of transmitting, and it's fun for hams to talk about those things.
So here's the great part. You don't have to know any of that stuff to work, guys. So now, I guess the thing obviously one of our goals here is we'd like to get more people active in RTTY. It's like L contest. The more people there are, the more fun it is. And it's amazing to me. You'll have a RTTY contest going on, and the bands are completely packed with guys that are working each other all over the world. And you'll tune down to the FT8, FT4 frequencies, and they're loaded. So if you've got the ability to do FT8 with your radio and you're set up to be able to transmit FT8, you have everything you need to be able to do RTTY AFSK. And you just got to change to a different software, and you're in the game. So I'd really like to encourage people to try that, because it to me, one of the big difference. FT8 is nice because it's all locked in and it copies all the calls faultlessly for you, and you can kind of see everything going on at one time. Where RTTY is still like old time radio. You have to tune around. You have to tune people in. You can't copy them until you get on frequency so the computer can start decoding. but also it's all free form. So you can be as verbose or as concise in your transmissions as you want. Some people, and I have to say, over the last 20 years, the quality of RTTY operating has gotten tremendous. It starts to be not quite the speeds of CW, but in terms of how concise everyone is. They're not sending a lot of extra stuff or extra call signs or anything. It's pretty much they give you a call and the exchange and on to the next one.
Yeah, RTTY contesting when it started years ago was really just an excuse for guys that like to operate RTTY and rag chew on RTTY to get on and have a little more activity, like Randy's talking about with contests. And so the first contests were, we talked about brag tapes, were in the old teleprinter days when you'd have a punch paper tape and you'd have a tape that would run through and talk about your grandmother's weather and the lat lawn of your aunt, and it just went on all this detail. And some of that crept into the early contests. And so when I got started in the early 2000s, that was kind of a big no-no that all the contesters were trying to get the casual guys, which we need in the contest, because as Randy says, the more people, the more fun for everybody. And so I just kind of told people, look, stop complaining about this stuff. Just get on and operate the way you think contests should operate, and it'll catch on. People will follow in. You don't need to, get on your soapbox and, tear them down or anything. Just encourage them, thank them for being on. And that's what's happened, I think, over time. There's been more and more people get involved in RTTY contesting. It's gotten more popular. And by and large, most of the people operate efficiently like you would on CW. And it's contagious. It works. What's happened in recent years, though, when FT8 came on in 2017, we've got a handful of people, 3 or 4%, that now send their exchange when they answer your CQ. And I'm absolutely convinced that's come from the FT world, because it never existed before then. And that's what's kind of neat, actually, about FT8, is that you can answer a CQ with part of the exchange or the exchange, and it kind of makes up for the fact that you got to wait 15 seconds for every QSO cycle.
Over time, just like you have, Ed, I mean, I've just built special macros just to deal with that situation and sort of moved on. I mean, it's very hard to berate or get angry at somebody over RTTY, because there's no voice and there's no paddle to mess with or anything like that. It's just sort of a very friendly, approachable mode. And I have no if somebody calls and they're not quite doing things in the right order, it's no problem. That's why I have 2 radios, and I'm just going to work the guy on the other radio.
The first guy that did that to me, and it hit me as soon as it happened, I thought, hot damn, this is great. He just sent me the exchange. I don't have to waste a cycle getting his exchange. So I sent my exchange and my QSL message and went on to the next station. And in parallel with that, the other guy, of course, was saying thank you, and I don't know, trying to have some more conversation, but I was off in the next QSO. So, and again, that kind of goes along with my direction of operating the way, I think that we can be efficient in contesting, and hopefully those guys will catch on when they realize. But, getting on a reflector and, berating these people isn't going to change anything.
Well, and the funny part is, their way is almost more efficient. Just like
it is
saying,
exactly.
Like sadly enough, I mean, I almost wonder if we should just switch to it. But please don't send me emails.
No, I that's why I say I think in contests you want to go with the flow, and that's all
Exactly.
I do. And so
room.
If they send me the exchange, I'm saying thank you, sir. Here we go.
Yeah, if you copy it all, and if no one else is calling you, I think it's one of these things where, you get away with it some percentage of time, and then other times.
Oh, it's very disruptive. It just completely screws up your flow. Yeah.
So one of the things that's interesting about RTTY is the computer's doing the decoding. So you do have to get somebody tuned in. And so you'll see there's various methods that different softwares have to visually show you what's going on. And after a while, you get so you can pretty much do it by ear. But even when you're tuned in, sometimes it's just not printing. Whether it's Polar Flutter or QRM or whatever it is. And so one of the things people do is run 2 decoders or run multiple decoders at the same time, with the hope that each one of them has slightly different properties, and maybe one will print when the other one doesn't. So talk about that. How do you decide?
Two decoders or 4 or 5 or 6, just depends, right? I mean, so there are several different algorithms that can be applied to receiving a RTTY signal. And if you look at the two major decoders that you'll sort of find in the RTTY world, MMTTY being one of them, and then another one being two-tone. What a lot of guys will do is they'll set one of those as their primary decoder, but they'll actually load several copies of the program listening to the same sound card and run them each in a different mode, like you said. And you'll be very surprised. You'll actually hear you'll see the different decoders getting completely different things. Sometimes a signal has it's too many guys calling you, or is just too garbled by the polar flutter, and only one of the decoders got it. And if you don't have all of them running in that different mode, you for sure just missed a call. And like both Ed and myself, when we're doing Worldwide or any of the other big contests, definitely have several decoders open at once, all in different modes.
It's always kind of amazing when half the message will print on one of them and then half on the other one.
Even better.
But it's all part of the game. We talk about skills and RTTY contesting. Sometimes to me, when you have multiple people calling you and you've got different stuff showing up in the different decoders, it's a little bit like playing Boggle with call signs, right? Here's a whole bunch of letters. Can you figure out which guy it probably is? And then go back to him. And then if you're lucky, he'll respond to you and actually send his call in the clear, and then you're on to the next guy.
And a lot of the logging software can even do a little bit of matching for you. So both WriteLog and M1MM and WinTest and DXLog to some extent will sort of highlight what it thinks a call sign is, and it'll even highlight and say that it's hey, this is a multiplier, or hey, this is a this is something that you should investigate. And then sometimes you can mouse over. So one thing to know about RTTY, there are two character sets, right? There are the letters and the figures. Okay, the letters are obviously the letters, and then the figures are the numbers. And there's a meta character that switches between those two. So what can happen is sometimes somebody will be transmitting along, and there's a static crash or momentary fading or something, and your decoder might just miss the character to change from numbers back to letters, or vice versa. One handy trick that you can do is, if you look at a standard QWERTY keyboard, the numbers line up diagonally with the letters. So Q would become 1, W would become 2, and vice versa. So you can sometimes do it just with your eyes if you really need to. But in other cases, like a lot of us will realize that 599 is TOO. That's just one of the very, very easy ones to sort of recognize.
So on the multiple decoders, what that does for RTTY is what we have in CW with our brain. If you're copying Morse code and you miss one of the elements of the code, you can just tell from the timing and the spacing, and there's just lots of other information that your brain uses. It's kind of like having multiple decoders. And RTTY, you don't have any of that. I mean, all you got are these letters that appear on the screen, and you got to somehow, if you got a good super check partial in your head, lots of times you can guess the calls. Sometimes if I get just one letter out of Randy's call and kind of can see where it is in the noise, I'll often guess correctly that it's him. But for the most part, you just got letters, and so multiple decoders really make that work. So my standard setup, my base setup is 4 decoders on my main radio, or my main VFO, and 2 decoders on my second VFO that I use for search and pouncing while I'm running on any given band. Which reminds me, seeing Randy here, one time, one of the things I learned in my very first RTTY contest from Aruba was that Jackie P43P won. I was second in Aruba that year. And one of the things I noticed, it was the first time I'd ever operated with a high rate in RTTY. One of the things I noticed Jackie was doing was he was sending people or telling people where his other radio was. So he's running on 2 radios. And so I grabbed onto that from the get-go, and I've been doing it ever since. So I did that to Randy one contest, and as soon as I went to my second radio, he was CQing in my frequency, and I should know better than to do that to a SO2R expert.
So one of the things we talk about a lot is rate, and I'm curious, given all that I've just heard, what is a good rate in RTTY? And I'm not talking SO2R.
Probably over 100. I mean, it's like any mode. You've got to have a balance. You want to have enough input, enough calls coming in that you can work them as fast as you can work, but you don't want so many that they're interfering with each other, that they're slowing you down, right? So your input rate has to be right. Conditions have to be right. But if you have that, then I would say 130, maybe 140 is probably one of the top rates if all the ducks are lined up in the right spot.
I remember 10 years ago with just one radio, if you got to 80, you were doing great. Just because guys tended to send a lot more stuff. And now, given that the band's open, let's say to Europe, and you don't have a lot of QRM or something like that, and maybe it's the first day, it's not hard really to get to 100. You got to know what you're doing. You have to be efficient. You have to try to get calls as fast as you can. No repeats. No different than the other modes. So 100's become pretty easy. Now, when you add the second radio, where you can really do 2B SIQ, which I could never do in CW, but I can do it in RTTY. Now it becomes possible to do the 150 plus hours. Ed, what's your biggest hour that you've ever had?
So I've had you can look on the Worldwide and WPIC's websites. I've had a number of 210, 200, and close to 220. So if you can do that with two radios, that's why I say I think 130, 140. I've never operated with one radio when conditions have been that good, because I'm always wanting to use two radios. But I think that's because with two radios you got the timing issue that messes things up, and if you got to do a repeat or whatever, it not only hurts you on that radio, it can hurt you on the other radio just due to timing. So you have to learn to who you're going to cut off or not cut off or wait for, and that sort of thing. And I'll have a sense that somebody's going to take longer to finish their their current message, and I'll go ahead and start the other radio just because I'm trying to eliminate dead time.
So while we're talking about rate, there's two things that probably separate you way above me. I'll never be able to touch it, is macros and all the different creative macros that you have, and then something called call stacking. So let's just talk about kind of what are some of the extra, other than sending CQ and the exchange and so on, what are some other macros that you would have typically loaded?
First thing I'd say about macros is that I make macro components. I don't make macros to do a particular scenario. So for example, my call is just once. If I want to send my call twice, all you have to do in RTTY is tap a key twice, right? And if I want to add, so most of the time in some of my messages, I don't send the other station's call. And that's depending on, of course, where I operate from. But if I sense that it's not needed for various reasons we could go into, I don't have that in the macro. But if I sense that it would be helpful, all I have to do is tap his call key. So I have a macro with just his call in it. So I have all these components available to me. The second thing I do is that I map each of the main macros that I use for each QSO phase. There are 4 QSO phases. I map each of those into the keys right around the inner key. And I'm a intersends message fanatic. And so I'm using the inner key and the semicolon and the apostrophe key to do everything when I'm running. And the 2 keys right above that are my search and pounce keys. So I literally, particularly since I'm SO2R and sometimes SO3R, one hand can run a radio completely, because you don't have to type out the stuff that you're sending. You can get by with the macros. So those are kind of the 2 things I would say about macros.
So as far as call stacking is concerned, It's an interesting technique, and it's something that I actually kind of learned from looking at Ed's presentations and sort of watching on air a little bit. Basically, what you're doing is you're slowing down to win. Okay, so when you call CQ and you have a few people come back, what you're effectively doing is you're just waiting to collect a couple of call signs. Okay, and the timing is very important. You don't want to wait too long because then they'll just start repeating themselves. So you maybe get 2 or 3. That's about the best that I've ever done. But what you can do is you can just sort of build up a stack of these in your logging software, and a lot of logging software is already sort of rigged to do this. You need to get the macros right to do it all. There's tutorials in the N1MM documentation and the write log documentation to do this. But basically, what'll happen is that at the end of the QSO that you're doing now, when you're just answering one of those 2 or 3 call signs, it's immediately going to switch to working the next guy so that you don't have to endure another pileup. So, when you say thank you, I'll say, thank you, now, Papa 49 X-ray, and then the exchange. And what that lets me do is avoid the pileup, because a pileup in RTTY is a little bit worse than, say one in sideband and or CW, because the computer has a little more trouble dealing with, the cacophony of several signals calling at once, to the point where it's destructive, and you might not get anything decoded at all if you don't, if enough people are calling you. So by avoiding that, you're avoiding the entire need for a repeat in that particular cycle. And then the only other way to increase rate is to try to do that times 2 radios. So if you're doing the 2BSIQ thing, and you're both stacking and doing 2BSIQ, and all your message links are pretty equal, then that's where you're kind of getting into these mid 250, 270 rates or so.
So how do you get things into the stack? Okay, so 3 different calls, print and highlight in the receive window. How do you load them in?
So I'm not as familiar with it in write log, but I know in N1MM, generally it's just a matter of double-clicking the other calls or holding control when you click one of the extra calls other than the one that you've already selected. And assuming that you've actually told it that I want to do stacking, and you've configured all the options that are necessary to do it, then it'll the actual logic of the macros will do the right thing at that point. Sometimes you'll see a box pop up that'll actually show you the list of call signs, and sometimes one of the calls ends up being garbage, or they end up being like a duplicate or something. So you need a way to quickly get rid of one of the call signs in your list, or maybe this particular QSO went on for a long time, needed a lot of repeats, so you're sure that the 3rd or 4th guy is probably given up on this pilot by now, and you just want to call CQ. So there's a lot of things that you just sort of learn operationally after you do it a couple times successfully, and then once you sort of figure those things out, it becomes very second nature.
You said something that implied that the mouse was involved. So is that so you have to click on call signs to get them? So
in N1MM, one of the ways you can do it is you can do this with the keyboard too, but in your little decoding window, you can just double click on a call sign, and that's the same thing as putting it as actually hitting the insert key and having it grab the next call sign looking thing and put it into the entry window. So there's a bunch of different ways that can be set up. For the longest time, I only recently started doing, using write log a little more, because I think it's a little more geared toward RTTY operations. But originally, when I was, the last several years I've been using N1MM, and the way that works is generally speaking, you click on the call sign, and that's how you get it into the entry window.
N1MM has a little bit more automation with respect to call stacking if you want to use it. I've found that it's actually, in my opinion, useless. It actually makes things worse. But there's kind of 2 modes. One is you can let the software just pull these highlighted calls out automatically, so you don't have to use a mouse to click it. The problem with that, of course, is that it's very seldom that it pulls the calls in the right order that you want. So I think most people have figured out that even though that sounds slick and it looks slick when you first try it, it's not very useful. So you want to, the operator wants to steer that. And unfortunately, it takes your hands off the keyboard to the mouse. But with Right Log, I've worked with Wayne Wright over the years, and he's really refined it to a pretty simple thing. So I have on the keyboard up above. So I said where I had my keys, two keys around the enter key for running, two keys above that for search and pounce. There are two keys above that, which are my pop and push. So I can put calls into and out of the stack. So if I've got a call that's in the entry window, but something happened, since I put it in there that I don't want to work that call, I can pop it out and I can pop another one in. So those keys are right there where my fingers are. But when I do what Bill says, the slow down to win, my sailing analogy of going around marks in sailboat racing, buoy racing, I first get the first QSO going. So the first call that it depends on whether I'm in California or Aruba. If I'm in Aruba, the first call that comes through, I don't care if it's a non-molt and the second one is a molt, the first call that comes through goes into the entry window. And as soon as I have waited a beat, a fraction of a second to get one or two more calls, I hit enter, which in my case sends the exchange to that station. And it picks Right Log picks the first, I have it configured to pick the first call that's highlighted. So all I have to do is tap a key. I mean, I can get that timing perfect. Now, while that message is going out, I've got 2 or 3 seconds. I can go through and select the calls I want to go into the stack. And when that message finishes, he sends his exchange. I now hit one key that sends the thank you now, and then I hit my normal exchange key that sends the exchange to the next one that's in the stack. So in Right Log, Wayne has it configured that I can define my right. Let's see, I work with both hands. So the non-normal mouse button, right? The other mouse button is configured to when I click a call with that, instead of going into the entry window, it goes into the stack. So what I do is normally I just hit the exchange key. It grabs the first call and starts sending it. While that's going on, I'm running around my decoder windows, putting calls into the stack. And then it's just a matter of running these two fingers on those two keys on my keyboard, and I run through the stack. And I've gotten as high as 4, and when I'm in Aruba, people sometimes will wait around long enough and I'll get 4. And when you're doing that on SO2R, it's really, really a kick. It's really, really fun. In California, it's a little bit the opposite. When a multiplier comes up, I'll usually work that first. And so, it's like anything, depends on where you are. You try to maximize what you can do in those conditions.
So we're kind of running out of time, but it's amazing when you think about it. We started in this conversation. We started with what is RTTY, 2 tones, and now we are now at the PhD level of how you run guys as fast as possible by call stacking and so on. And part of what makes the call stacking work in RTTY is it does take a certain amount of time for people who are tuning around to acquire new QSOs. So there is a tendency for people to wait longer than you'll see in other modes. So as a result, this whole idea that you can work somebody and then just immediately flow from thank you into now the next guy, you have a pretty good chance that the next guy will have waited, especially if you're P49X and everybody knows this is what you're doing. They'll stick around, and you're also really loud and the only guy they can hear on 10 meters. So, but it's these little things. And even when you're using 2 radios and not doing all this call stacking stuff like I usually do, the fact that people will wait buys you a little bit of time as you're switching back and forth between the 2 radios. If somebody takes too long on one and you're kind of handcuffed, it's okay. The guys will still be there on the other one. But if we go back to the basics of this, contesting is contesting. So all the things you already know are still true. You got to get calls. You got to CQ or make your call sign known to the other guy. You have to copy his correctly. You got to get the exchange and get it in the log. And everything beyond that is just getting better. So don't be intimidated if you can't call stack or run out 200 guys an hour. You can still have a lot of fun. And most people really can be a real amp killer. So when you look at the scores, most of the people who are operating RTTY are running low power. So it's not like you've got to be king of the hill to be able to work people.
Yeah, just keep in mind, an amplifier that's rated at 100%, intermittent commercial or amateur service, the period of cool off is supposed to be 5 minutes. So you're supposed to, within a 5-minute period, you're supposed to be transmitting as much as you're receiving. In RTTY, that's very easy to do, especially, in fact, in some cases, if you have a high enough rate with one radio, you can even be harder on an amplifier than you would be with SO2R, because at least with SO2R, the other amplifier is occasionally getting a break. So it's very easy to, burn up amplifiers, burn up antenna switches, burn up, even radio finals. So be a little, just be a little careful running full smoke and RTTY. And you don't have to. Remember, since it's, full, key down duty cycle mode, and the energy is concentrated in a very, very small, relatively small bandwidth, that signal is going to go really far. Okay, so like compared to a sideband signal, so you don't necessarily have to have as much power to to go as far in RTTY.
The other thing I noticed is you don't hear that many RTTY signals at all during the week. When there's a contest on, all these people show up. So don't be surprised if you're looking for somebody to practice with. It's hard to find somebody. You may have to get a neighbor or call somebody to try to work to get the kinks worked out of your system. But in a contest weekend, the FT modes have kind of set the low end. But on 20 meters, when the band is busy, you'll hear guys all the way up to 14,150. So there's a lot of people packed in there. And the same thing on 15, they go above 125, 130. So you'll have 50 to 60 KCs on these bands that are just packed with RTTY signals. So there's a lot of people out there, and they all want to work you.
Yeah, for during the week, if you're trying to get started, to your question, Kevin, of how do you get into RTTY, the ARRL bulletin is sent several times during the week, and so you can work on your receive there. And then every Thursday night there's a 30-minute RTTY mini contest, which is just for the purpose that we're talking about, being able to practice. So there are ways to do that. And then almost every weekend there's some RTTY contest. May not be a major one, but there will be one, maybe even a QSO party that allows RTTY that you can get on and have somebody to work. But outside of that, there's just no RTTY. In fact, to show you how there's no RTTY, when I was last in Aruba in February, I actually, while I was doing other things, got on and CQ'd on RTTY 3 or 4 hours during the day and worked about 4 or 5 people in like 4 hours from Papa 49 X-ray. And right below me, 5 KC below me, the FT8 guys were QRMing each other, and just, the band was exploding with activity. And so outside of the few D expeditions that are still working RTTY and contests, there isn't a lot of activity on. But there are those two things, the ARRL bulletin and then the Thursday night little mini contest.
Well, guys, this is great stuff. I think this is the best explanation about RTTY that I've ever heard. And as Randy said, I mean, we've gone from the elemental right up to the PhD level, and I really appreciate all of your time. Bill, Ed, Randy, thank you.